and so it's really nice. Caden is doing doing the internship today to learn, and that, so it's nice that our youth are excited to be involved and help us with the worship service. That was it.
Awesome. And speaking of the Bravos, Al's father is nearing the end of his life. So we want to hold Isaac and all the boys and Al in our prayers. Isaac, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say thank you. I would like to have some prayers for my Data. I don't mean to share this sad news with you guys. It's hard for my father, mostly because he loves his parents very much, and I would like any of you in this room to pray for my father and for the rest of his family, my nana, all the family that I have, for my Data. And when the time comes, I would like you guys to just have a moment of silence for him when that time comes and stuff like that. So that would be nice for you guys to do that. Just pray for my dad.
We will, Isaac. Thanks
Thank you.
for sharing. We love you, buddy. Well, I can now say officially, good morning. Welcome to Desert Palm UCC. Glad to have you here. We always begin by saying, wherever you are in your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. We're a group of pretty eclectic seekers, I think it's safe to say. Speaking of which, on the interfaith front, I've been getting a little more involved in the Arizona interfaith movement, which, of course, Dr. Fairbanks first introduced us to through the, as far as I know, maybe Don did back in the day, but Dr. Fairbanks has been very involved. They have the big annual Golden Rule banquet, and he usually invites about 10 or 12 people from the church, gets a couple of tables, and they are doing a lot of great work. And so coming up September 26th, I'm just going to mention this because there's still time to sign up if anybody's interested. We're going to have a talking circle event, and so that's a Thursday evening, September 26th. It's an evening, 6 p.m. There's a light dinner served, and then we've done one of these already, and it was really fun and interesting. I talked about it a little bit in the sermon the next following Sunday, because you really get a pretty eclectic group of people from different faith backgrounds, and there's a prompt for the table, and you talk about it. And so you get to know people from other cultures, other worldviews. You share your thoughts and insights from your own religious tradition, and it's a great event. So if you'd like to know more about it, ask me after church, or you can go online and just look for Arizona Interfaith Movement. Well, beyond that, I'll say a word about today's theme. Mark, did you want to jump in and say anything?
Just Sonia sent out some information for the parents, all the parents of our children and youth. We want to meet with you. Sonia and I want to meet with you next Sunday right after church to talk scheduling for some fun events that we're going to do with youth and children. More importantly, we're going to do something a little new and different for Christmas Eve, and what we're going to plan with them for the Christmas Eve service. And it's such that we need to get started early on that kind of stuff with them. So we want to encourage you all to be here. And just as a reminder, I am preaching next Sunday for the last film series, in our film series, and I've chosen the film August Rush, and I'll send out a little synopsis during the week. Unfortunately, right now, if you want to watch it, it'll probably cost you about $3 on different streaming things, but it's worth the $3. So have an opportunity to watch August Rush, and I'll give you a little, some little things in advance just to prepare yourself for what we're going to talk about. So that was it.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, and today's movie that we will be exploring as part of our summer sermon series is Driving Miss Daisy. You can see it up there. This is one of those classics that I'd imagine most of us have seen, but if you haven't, don't worry. I'll give a little refresher summary of the film. But you know, it basically looks at the power of friendship, and another theme that we're dealing with today is grace. You know, and our passage from Isaiah where God says, "Behold, I do a new thing." And the idea is that God is constantly unfolding in our lives and history. So there's always something new happening. Oftentimes we don't see it and appreciate it until we look back and we realize how sacred a certain friendship might be. So this is a movie that captures that and lifts it up in a very beautiful way. So we'll be exploring that a bit more today. And we have some special music. Daniel's going to be playing Amazing Grace, speaking of grace. So let's begin a time of worship.
Please stand and body your spirit for the call to worship. Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years from..." Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The glory of youth is their strength, but the beauty of the aged is their gray hair. Remember the days of old. Consider the years long past. Ask your father, and he will inform you. Your elders, and they will tell you. Remind us to ask and teach us to listen. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. Day by day, we strive to be more holy. Listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old. We are grateful for parents who teach and nurture in love. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me, until I proclaim your might to all the generations to come. In old age, they too produce fruit. They are always green and full of sap. You who are younger must accept the authority of the elders.
If you'd join me, actually, join Daniel is going to, if you go ahead and take a seat. And Daniel's going to do our introduction for the Amazing Grace, and then we will sing verses 1, 3, and 5.
Peace. Sorry for dashing by you there. I just had a question for Mark. Peace. Oh, okay. Yeah.
There we go. Oh, thank you. Let's sing our youth and children up. And you're going to come up over here by me because I'm going to talk to you today. So here we go. This little light of mine. This little light of mine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yay! How are you guys this morning? Very cool. So, how many of you have your parents do really special things for you? What's the special thing your parents have done for you? Their mother or father?
Love me for who I am.
Very nice. Exactly. Does your mom or dad or your grandparents do special things for you?
Well, they let me go to Disneyland.
Yeah, that's really good. Anything special that your parents or grandparents or even could be a school teacher or anybody does for you?
Okay. My Nana and Grandpa let me go swimming in the pool.
Nice. So our parents and our teachers and people in our lives do things for us all the time and help us as we grow up. And today we're going to be talking about Driving Miss Daisy and the movie Driving Miss Daisy, and it's about somebody who's gotten to the age where they can no longer function on a regular basis and needs assistance and needs help. And just like Driving Miss Daisy, my mom, back in several years ago, was at the Phoenix Public Library, and on her way home, didn't realize it, but she was having TIAs. And all of a sudden, it took 6 cop cars to get her pulled over, and she didn't even realize it. And I get a phone call. And her name comes up on my phone, and hi, Mom, and this male voice says, "What's your relationship with Barbara Gaston?" And it just really scared me, and I said, "Well, that's my mom." And he said, well, they were loading her into an ambulance, taking her to the Mayo Clinic to see what happened. So because of that incident, and she could have done some major damage, fortunately nobody was hurt or anything like that. So I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I take her keys away and, take away her independence? And I even called her doctor to try to get him to do it because I was too chicken. And fortunately, one day I came over to the house, and my mom goes, I was just reading an article in AARP, and it was about when to know when to give up your keys. And she goes, "What do you think? Let me have them." So God was on my side. It was a decision she made on her own, which is really cool. But right now, my mom is because she fell, fractured her hip and broke her femur. Fortunately, she's coming out of rehab tomorrow. and getting to come home. Me and my siblings have taken the time to redo her entire house, to making sure it's safe and putting up bars and all kinds of things like that. And having to spend time during the week, take her to physical therapy and do all those things. And you know, I am so blessed that at this point in my life, I actually had the free time to be able to do all of that for her and to be that friend, to be that person who can do that. Because when I reflect back on everything she has done for me and always been my champion and been there, I'm glad that I can have that moment to do that. So as we learned about driving Miss Daisy today and the things that go on with that, and take time to appreciate how we interact with each other. So instead of the Lord's Prayer, we're going to do a prayer today. If you want to go ahead and pull up the first slide. And let's say this prayer together. And you in the booth there need to pay attention. Woohoo! So this is how we help each other and be kind. Ben, Kaden, we're moving on to the next thing. So there we go. Yay. So let's say this prayer together. You guys want to join me in this prayer? Yeah, here we go. So here we go. All together. Gracious God, we ask you to bless your children who have grown old. When they can no longer care for themselves, send them loving caretakers who appreciate their wisdom and their richness of their experience. Send your angels to keep them safe as long as they live and to lead them home to you when their work is done. Bless the families of the elderly with insight and good judgment. Next slide. Yeah, that's all right. And send your Holy Spirit to help them make wise decisions and grant them the patience to care for those who once cared for them. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. So let's sing you guys out to Sunday school, shall we? Here we go. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Please stand and body your spirit. From Isaiah 43:18 through 21. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The wild animals will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, for I gave water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people, the people whom I formed for myself, so that they might declare my praise.
So I wanted to begin today. Actually, I rarely dedicate a sermon to anybody, but I just felt like I want to dedicate this sermon today to a friend of mine named Barbara Yearwood, who has since passed away. She was a parishioner of mine back in Brooklyn, and I spent 10 years having Miss Barbara in Brooklyn. When I was a minister, you know, she came up to me early on, and so one thing led to another. Ended up with a weekly ritual in which I took her grocery shopping every week for about 10 years. So I keep having Miss Daisy without this story, and and the bond that grows up between people when you center, you know, God is always doing a new thing. God is always emerging, and I think God emerges in the context of those relationships. It's hard to capture the way our daily rituals accumulate and inform who we are. And as I said in my introduction earlier, my greeting, that it's oftentimes only when we look back on our lives that we realize how sacred and beautiful some aspects are, the relationships that we've had. One of the great gifts of a work of art, and I do think Driving Miss Daisy is really a masterpiece, is it gleans a whole bunch of time and holds it up for us like this luminous miracle. And the very opening scene of the film, there's light coming through a window. There's a mirror, and I think I suspect it's that we are going to be playing with light and meaning and art and true hands in front of the mirror. Only the mirror is the camera. So we, as the mirror, are gazing deeply into her soul. Within a couple of hours, this film captures about 50 years from maybe 20 years of the life of its characters. And the characters, and again, in case you haven't seen it, and I'll review a little bit of what it's about. It's Miss Daisy, the elderly Southern woman, her driver Hoke, Hoke, and her son Boyley. There's some interesting Southern names here. Of course, Hoke is played by Morgan Freeman, and Boyley is played by Dan Aykroyd, all of whom were nominated for Oscars, and Miss Daisy did win the Oscar. And in fact, there's if you go back and watch her acceptance speech, there's a beautiful moment where, you know how the camera pans to different reactions of people in the audience. And when her name is announced as winning the Oscar, one of the celebrities they zero in on is Morgan. Her co-star in that film, of course. And the look on his face is so beautiful. Pure love, and that he's just so his friend for winning the Oscar. But it's a beautiful acceptance speech. So if you haven't seen the film, and this is all kind of Greek or Chinese or whatever, it's a pretty basic storyline here. Miss Daisy is getting on in years, like Mark's mother, as the story that he shared with us today, and she can't drive anymore. Her son hires a black man named Hoke. This is the Morgan Freeman character, to take her wherever she needs to go. Only, of course, if you've seen the film, in the very beginning, she refuses to accept the fact that she needs this driver. So Morgan Freeman sits in her kitchen all day long, day after day. And she refuses, And then one day she says, "I'm going to the grocery store," and she starts walking to the grocery store, and he's driving next to her like 5 miles an hour, like, "Miss Daisy, just get in the car, please." And she doesn't want to, but her neighbors are starting to look like, what is going on here? So finally, she gets in the car and she accepts this new relationship, which is going to change both of their lives. So in a very general sense, this film is about aging, it's about accepting help, it's about friendship and love. So in short, it's about the stuff of life, right? The early portion of the film, I think the film, one reason it's a masterpiece is the way it just weaves and sculpts time. And in the very beginning, it feels like everyday life. After Miss Daisy looks in the mirror, gets all ready to go out, she gets in her car and backs off a cliff, basically. So the car is dangling and just, wrecked. And that's the indication that she can't drive anymore. But that all feels kind of an everyday time. the way it's filmed, the way we're introduced to her. We're introduced to the Morgan Freeman character when a guy is stuck in an elevator. Morgan Freeman has come to talk to Miss Daisy's son about the job of being a driver, and this guy is stuck in an elevator. And you know how it is with men, you know, somebody's digging a hole, one guy digs and 10 men stand around and watch, right? So one guy is stuck in the elevator and there's 20 people gathered, you know, wondering how can we get this guy out? Nobody can figure anything out, and they say, we're gonna have to call the elevator company, and they're about an hour away. And Hoke says, you know, hey, Jim, is that you in there? And he says, yeah. He says, do you see a little gadget up near the top? And he says, yeah, and he tells him what to do, and all of a sudden the elevator comes back to life and the doors open, and everybody looks at Hoke like, who is this guy? So it's an indication that this is not Hoke's first rodeo. He has accumulated a great deal of wisdom over the course of his life, and he's been referred to be Miss Daisy's driver for a reason. But after these necessary introductions of the characters, time begins to pass by seasons, much as the way it does in our actual lives, especially when we look back, right? We think of what we did in the summer or the fall before that. In the spring, in the film, Miss Daisy tends the grave of her late husband. She goes out to the cemetery and she plants flowers at his grave. At Christmas times, there are family gatherings, and although because she's Jewish, there are non-presents. She gives Hoke a present and says, this is not a Christmas present because I'm Jewish, but I'm giving you this on Christmas. The years begin to flow by with special birthdays and family gatherings. And time's passage is very important in this film because the relationship between Hoke and Miss Daisy is like a fine wine, meaning it gets better with age. We forget this wisdom that some things do get better with age, right? We're trapped in our death-denying culture that worships at the fountain of youth. But Driving Miss Daisy reminds us that things like friendship and love and all forms of intimacy can deepen with time. It invokes this life-death-life cycle that we've been talking about. And yes, it inescapably involves loss and grief, right? That's part of the human experience. But one of the great gifts of the film is that it normalizes aging and the reality of death, and it puts it all within a meaningful framework. And so it is. At one point in the film, Miss Daisy awakens on a cold, dark night in the morning. It's in the winter. We see her mansion from the outside. Everything is covered in snow. So there's no way anybody could get to her house, we would think. In the life-death-life cycle of the natural world, we are in the death of winter, in death's domain. Beyond that, the power is out in the house, so she's in this huge home alone. Her cook, Idella, has recently died, so her isolation on this wintry morning is all the more dramatic. She lights a single candle, looks like one of these, and takes it to a chair and sits down and begins nervously flipping through a magazine in her darkened house without power. Then there's a sound at the back of the door, and at first she's a little startled and she calls out, "Hello?" But it turns out to be Hoke, her driver, who says he learned how to drive on the ice years ago as a young delivery man. And because he knows Miss Daisy can't begin her day without a cup of coffee, he has also stopped by Krispy Kreme and picked up a cup of coffee and some donuts. I have to go back and see if he brought her donuts, or I'm just thinking that he would have, because that's what I would want. So Miss Daisy has gone from being alone in the cold depths of winter to having her home warmed up by the presence of a friend and by a fire that he offers to light. And all of that, I think, is beautiful enough in its own right, but it's a masterpiece because it takes everything to a whole nother level. We're plunged into the mystery of the life cycle. When Miss Daisy says to Hope, just the two of them alone on this wintry morning, she says, "You know, Hope, Idella was lucky." Idella is Miss Daisy's cook who passed away days ago. And Miss Daisy is referring specifically to how Idella died. She was sitting in the kitchen, sorting beans, watching her soap opera, and the next thing you know, the beans spilled on the ground and she was gone. Hoke knows Miss Daisy well at this point, and he knows exactly what she's saying, that Idella was lucky for that reason. And he takes in what she's getting at. And he says about Idella being lucky, yeah, I suppose she was. He's an honest, forthright man. He just speaks his mind. And somehow in this way, through the normalization of death, in the wintry darkness of this huge house, death is given its due. But these two old friends still have some living to do. So it's at that point where Hoke says, "Let me make a fire," which he does. Now, this is the deep South in the 60s, according to the time frame of the film. So it goes without saying that the story is saturated with racial tension. And then we have, of course, Hoke, Morgan Freeman, being black, Miss Daisy being white. But the film introduces the subject very deftly, very gracefully. Again, it's just so well done. Remember, in the very beginning of the film, Miss Daisy is stepping in front of the mirror. Okay, she's getting ready to go out. I'm not sure if she was going to synagogue or where she was going, but she's looking at the mirror and she's making sure everything is in order. She's wearing a white dress. She's holding a white purse, which we see with white gloves, and we see that as she lifts everything to adjust her hat. So everything is white, white, white. Now, I know you guys are thinking, you know, I make everything about race, but sometimes it really is about race, you know? Listen to what happens next here. Miss Daisy comes downstairs, and this is before Idella has passed away. She's doing the dishes or washing something in the sink, and so the camera is facing Idella, and behind her is Miss Daisy. And Miss Daisy passes in the background, and she says, "Idella, I'm going out." And Idella says, "Yes, I'm." Keeps scrubbing away, doesn't look up, you know, doesn't need to. But in the background to what Idella is doing, the radio is playing. And if you go back and watch this again, this film again, notice this, because the commercial on the radio is for Pepsodent. And it says that when you use the new and improved Pepsodent, it makes your teeth whiter than ever. White, white, white. Then the music lightens up and Miss Daisy jumps into her car, and that's when she crashes it. So that it's all connected. I hope you can feel that. It begins with race and whiteness and a woman looking in a mirror. It is a fairy tale for our times. Mirror, mirror on the wall, what in the world is going on in this world of ours, right? Please mirror films which reflect back the world. Tell us what is going on. And the film does that. It weaves in all of these themes of aging and relationship and friendship and race so masterfully. And it comes to a somewhat of a culmination when Miss Daisy is invited to go to an event where Martin Luther King Jr. is going to speak. And she tries to get her son to go. He's a middle-aged industrialist in this town. He's made a ton of money. and he basically, this is Dan Aykroyd character, and he says, you know, Mama, if I go to that event, I'm going to lose some business. You know, and he doesn't want to lose the business. And he says to his mom, you should invite Hoke. Bring Hoke to hear Dr. King. But that Miss Daisy's a little uncomfortable with that. She says, oh, Hoke wouldn't want to go. He can hear Dr. King anytime. Yeah. Of course, as we're watching this and hearing this, we're thinking, wait a minute, you know, of course he'd want to go. So why doesn't Miss Daisy invite him? You know, this is just left to us as viewers to try to decipher, and it's an aside, but I think it's an interesting one. Why would she not want him to go? Did she have unconscious feelings towards this handsome, younger man, right? That she hasn't quite worked out. It's not clear. But it all comes up rather awkwardly as Hoke is driving her to the MLK event. Right before, you know, they arrive at the event, she says to Hoke from the back seat, Hoke, you know, my son said the craziest thing. And Hoke says, what's that, Miss Daisy? And she says, he said I should have invited you to this MLK event. And there's this awkwardness, right? And she says, but I told him, you know, you wouldn't want to go. You don't want to go, would you? And, you know, and he's dressed as her driver, and he basically says, you know, Miss Daisy, if you wanted to invite me to join you, you should have done so weeks ago. And that's where they leave it. And she gets out and she goes into the event. It's one of those underlying dynamics that can kind of shake up a friendship, but not destroy it, right? These things happen. And then the real stroke of genius in the film. There begins, as Miss Daisy goes into the event and sits down and is looking at this empty seat beside her where Hoke could be sitting, we hear Dr. King's voice in a voiceover frame what's happening. And he says, it is not the flagrant violence of the self-proclaimed racist that is most dangerous. It is the silence and apathy of the comfortable. And there's Miss Daisy, quite comfortable at this point in her life, looking at that empty chair where Hoke could be had she only invited him. So for a moment, you know, we're sitting there in judgment of Miss Daisy. You know, she kind of blew it here, right? But the film opens the lens at this point, widens the lens, and reminds us that Miss Daisy, too, like Hoke, has experienced depression. She's an elderly woman. She's Jewish in the South, right, which is not easy. So there's some intersectionality going on here. I think it's kind of interesting, too, that I just Googled just now this morning, you know, when did the term intersectionality emerge, which means that, you know, people are oppressed in different ways. And it emerged in print officially 1989. This film comes out in 1990. So these things were bubbling up in the culture. So Miss Daisy, too, has dealt with these realities, you know, social oppression as a Jew. And yet she's a very wealthy person with a lot of power over people of color. So she's doing, hopefully, what we all try to do, which is wrestle with our complicity, those areas of life in which we do have power, while also seeking liberation and healing for ourselves and the wider society. Now, all this takes a very serious turn when Miss Daisy's temple is bombed. She learns of it when she and Hoke I think they're on their way to the temple, if I remember this. They're in a rainstorm, and they're in a terrible traffic jam. And Hoke jumps out of the car into the rain, goes and talks to a police officer. What's happening? Why are we all stopped? And he tells Hoke, the temple has been bombed. So Hoke comes back and he tells Miss Daisy, and she can't believe it. We watch as she struggles, and she just outright denies. She says, "Oh, that police officer must have been lying." But then gradually, in the moment we go through this process with her, she realizes, my house of worship has been bombed. And she says to Hoke, "Who would have done such a thing?" And Hoke answers very wisely. He says, the same people who always do those kinds of things. I mean, this is the South. This is Klan land, right? And we get it. It's the Klan or it's some other white supremacist militia type group of domestic terrorists, and it's the same stuff that we're dealing with now, of course. But we're right there with Miss Daisy. She just can't believe such a thing has happened. These various themes and layers of meaning all flow into one of the film's closing scenes. It's here where the passage of time takes on a distinctly religious flavor, capturing how a life well lived can yield great spiritual abundance. It takes place on Thanksgiving Day. We're fast forwarded now into the future at the end of the film. Hoke, by this time, has stopped working for Miss Daisy. The big old mansion has been sold, and Miss Daisy's in a nursing home, and her son and Hoke meet up to go visit her. Miss Daisy has advanced in years. She approaches them in the nursing home on a walker, her head's down. Her son helps her get into a chair at one of the dining tables, and then, showing their intimacy, Hoke makes just a slight adjustment to the chair the way she likes it. And before her son can sit down, Miss Daisy says to her son, Boyley, go make yourselves useful. And he says good-naturedly to Hoke, "Mama wants you all to herself, Hoke." So it's just Hoke and Miss Daisy. And this is really, like an Oscar-winning performance. Because Miss Daisy looks up from the ocean of her life, and she's weary with it all. You can just see the fatigue, like a gravitational force just pulling her down. But then she kind of sees her friend, and she says, "How are you, Hoke?" And one of the great lines of movies of all time, he says, "Well, I'm doing the best I can, Miss Daisy. I suppose that's all we can do." And Miss Daisy lights up, and she says, "I'm doing the best I can too." And it's such a moment of grace, where it's not about doing it right. It's not about doing it perfectly. It's not about anything performance related. It's about being yourself and doing the best you can. Now, it goes without saying that life has not been easy for these two friends. They're dealing with aging. They're dealing with all the changes it brings. They're dealing with the approach and the reality of death. And yet, somehow, there's this sense that always, with whatever time is left, life can be savored. And the older we get, the more we get that, right? That's hopefully some of the wisdom that comes with aging. You begin to see how beautiful life is. Not all the bad stuff and the suffering and the torture and war, but when you take all of life, all 13 billion years of the cosmos, the efflorescence of life on this planet, the way that the oceans breathe out and the trees breathe in, when you take it as a whole, it is so heartbreakingly glorious. And after a brief moment of this sacred connection between these two old friends who are agreeing that all we can do is do our best, Hoke as a true caregiver, notices that Miss Daisy has not touched her Thanksgiving pie. So, and it's Thanksgiving, right, of all days, gratitude. And this is, again, where the artistry of the film blends seamlessly into religious realities and the notions of communion, of caring, of love. The film began, remember, with Miss Daisy resisting help. But we are at the other end of the story now, and she has been transformed. And she accepts the bite of pie that Hoke offers her. And then she gives him that look. You could know that look of like, that's good. I want another. Take, eat, the stuff of life. Let's enjoy it while we are here. May it be. Amen.
It's the time for the call for offering. Our ancestors in faith gathered together long ago to remember, to be restored, to be renewed. They shared their story, prayed together, and made an offering to God as they prepared to set out on the long journey to freedom in the Promised Land. Today, we gather to remember and to pray together, to be restored and renewed. And we bring our offerings so the ministry of this church will continue to participate in the saving works of God. Let us gather our gifts together and offer them to God in gratitude and praise.
You're good. You're
Once
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew.
Please join me in the offertory prayer. For the blessings of this and all our days, not just this money, but also our lives, freely offered in gratitude for all you have done for us. Use them. May God be gracious unto you. May God's light shine on you and all you see. May God's presence be with you always, now and forever. Our worship is ending, but our service to the world begins. Now we'll do our sung benediction, which we hold hands for. If you've had a cold recently and don't want to hold hands for any reason, you can just cross your arms and we'll respect that. But otherwise, we're hand holders around.